irrational hate alchemist. And of course, he's a writer for the Newsday Scientist and has written this book, Peoplequake, which is available on the side here. He'll be speaking, he tells me, for 40 minutes, which is 35 to 40 minutes, after which we will have time for contributions and questions and everything. So we're going to that more. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'm hoping the microphone now works across there. But does that work, or do I need to?
Yeah, it works.
That's okay. All right. This is going to be a good news story. I mean, there will be some anger in here, so don't worry too much. But it is a good news story. It's the title of my book, Peoplequake. I guess it sounds alarming, but I'm hoping actually to diffuse some of our demographic fears. We're in the middle of a century-long demographic earthquake around the world that's been reshaping our world. It's been going on for a century or more. This is the story about how, in my view, the doomsters, you hear a lot from them, have got it wrong. And how we are solving what seemed about the most difficult problem for the future of humanity. And how we are doing it without draconian measures by big governments of the kind that I remember people discussing, without crackdowns on our liberties. So I think that's pretty good news. What's more, it's been solved by the world's poorest women, the people often seen as villains in the population story, are turning into the heroes. Like this cocoa farmer and mother I met in Cameroon who had one child and no plans for any more. Millions like her around the world. But tragically, and perhaps for all these reasons, it's a good news story that we're remarkably reluctant to accept. Because it goes against the prevailing wisdom, especially of the more pessimistic breed of environmentalists. And until not long ago, I guess I counted myself among those as well. Sorry about introducing these guys. Perhaps some of you saw a few months ago Jeremy Irons in the Sunday Times talking about how the world was doomed by overpopulation. He's apparently planning to make an Al Gore-style movie about the population problem. He's a kind of screen idol with a social conscience, or that's how he'd see himself. Us journalists are inclined to maliciously remember that he has 7 homes. So maybe we have a little room, including a pink castle in Ireland, apparently. But he says his inconvenient truth is that, as he puts it, there are just too many of us. Perhaps too many rich people, but we'll think about that. One of the themes of the second half of this talk. In this worldview, overpopulation is driving global warming and will one day make the planet uninhabitable. Irons thinks that a new plague, like the Black Death, he said 700 years ago, is going to be nature's way of solving the problem. A real kind of Malthusian fundamentalist here. And he's far from alone. Other right-thinking people, or you might imagine a right-thinking people, will talk the same stuff. So Jonathan Porritt, David Attenborough, in attacking the politically correct, as they see them, for ignoring the population bomb. Now, both these guys are patrons of something called the Optimum Population Trust, which recently changed its name to Population Concern. And that not long ago was warning that, quote, compulsory limits on births may become unavoidable. A real hardline strain that operates among many people who fear the population bomb. And these people, I guess, aren't malicious. Irons has also said things about the scandal of global poverty that I agree with. But on the subject of population, I believe they're talking nonsense. Worse, I think it's dangerous nonsense. For a start, the population bomb that I remember being scared by 40 years ago as a school kid is being diffused fast. That's the fundamental good news here. In the 1960s, the American biologist Paul Ehrlich wrote a famous book that gave us the phrase the population bomb. That's the cover. Now, butterflies actually were Ehrlich's academic speciality. He saw how some colonies of the insect bred and bred until they devoured all their food and were wiped out. And he figured that humans were like that too. It really was as simple as that. And back then, I guess it looked fairly likely. Women were having 5 or 6 children back in the 1970s. And most of those children were growing up and having their own children. The human population was doubling in a generation. And that was why Ehrlich came up with the ultimate kind of doomsday narrative, really. He said the battle to feed humanity is over. Sometime between 1970 and 1985, the world will undergo vast famines. Hundreds of millions of people are going to starve to death, he said. Well, that's famine, but what happened? The world's population has doubled since Ehrlich wrote his book, and we have had famines, but nothing like on the scale that he suggested. The world population was 3.5 billion when he wrote that book. It's now 7 billion. We have doubled our population. And yes, we've had famines, but nothing on anything like the scale that he predicted, because amazingly, food production has also doubled with population. In fact, ahead of time, it got there faster. I'm amazed by this. I remember thinking, back when I sort of heard about Ehrlich and what he was saying, how could the world possibly double food production in a generation? Well, it has. Now, thanks to the green revolution of high-yielding crop varieties bred by scientists, now many of us will have criticisms about the green revolution. But the fact is, you have to say, it did do the job. The scientists were asked to double world food production, and they did. And that bought time. Time that we, or rather the world's women, are using. Because the other big surprise, as I say, is the population bomb is being diffused. Now, you may not have heard this, but today's women have half as many children as their mothers back in Ehrlich's day. An average, well, when I wrote the book, it was 2.6. It's now come down to 2.5. So back then they had 5 or 6, now they're down to 2.5. Not just in the rich world, I'm not talking about, but almost everywhere. It's a reproductive revolution going on right around the world, right now, that people don't talk about. Now 2.5 is getting very close to the replacement level to reproduce the next generation. Now, allowing for girls who don't make it to adulthood, women need to have, as a global average, around 2.3 children to keep up numbers. Here's a map from, don't worry about the detail, it's a map from the book showing essentially that point. The odd shapes of the countries that you can see there are because I distorted country sizes to reflect their population rather than their geographical area. So China and India are very fat, as you'll see. The Americans look a bit skinny. Australia, if you can find that, well, I'm not sure what part of it is into that. I guess there aren't many people in Australia. But now, look at the shading. There are 4 areas of shading there representing fertility rates, the number of children that the average woman has in those countries. The 2 lighter shades are countries with below replacement level fertility, and the 2 darker shades are above replacement level. So the darkest shade here is where women have more than 3 children. Usually look like more than 3. Now in Ehrlich's time, most of the world was in that category. Now only a handful of countries are. And this is a huge change. Why Irons, Jonathan Porritt, David Attenborough, and the rest of the doom-mongers about population are wrong. Half the world now has fewer than a replacement level of children. That includes Europe and North America, you won't be surprised about that, but also the Caribbean, most of the Far East, from Japan down to Vietnam, down to Thailand, and much of the Middle East as well, from Algeria to, and this one surprisingly, Iran. In the past 25 years, behind the veil, the number of children that Iranian women are having has crashed from 8, which I would admit was a bit exceptional because they had a war on the time, but down from 8 to less than 2, 1.7 in fact. Women in Tehran today have fewer children than their sisters in New York or London. The mullahs may not like it, that's what's happening. I mean, Ahmadinejad certainly doesn't like it. He called in 2006 for women to return to their main mission of having babies. But nobody's been listening there. In fact, his own administration runs a condom factory. Incidentally, one interesting consequence of this demographic earthquake, this collapse of the number of children that couples are having, you could actually, I think, see on the streets of Iran last year, and I might suggest in the Arab Spring this year, during all those demonstrations for democracy. And that's a picture of some of the demonstrators in Iran, but you could reproduce that now in a number of other countries across the Middle East. A huge majority of Iran's population today is in its 20s. There are not many old people, not yet, and remarkably few children. But there are huge numbers of young adults born during the baby boom. Now, some people fear these as future terrorists, but actually, no, I think they're Democrats. change, and perhaps because they're not held up by having large families and having to stay at home or whatever, are getting out onto the streets to demonstrate. I think that's not the only thing that we saw in the Arab Spring, but I think that's part of what we saw. This is, if you like, democracy in action, but also demography in action. That youth bulge, which some people fear as the, you know, they're going to be the future terrorists or whatever. Actually, they're the future Democrats. Now, some of this worldwide reproductive revolution has been happening because of nasty, coercive, repressive governments doing the kind of things that the demographic doommongers were calling for back in the 1960s and the 1970s. You know, one-child policies and all the rest. Now, but really, mostly, actually, we are talking about China, where the communist government does decide how many children couples have there. The one-child policy is brutal and repulsive, in my view, but the odd thing is, I think now, it probably doesn't make much difference. The Chinese women, this is one in Singapore, I believe, Chinese women around the world have gone the same way as mainland China, without compulsion. If you go to Taiwan, if you go to Singapore, if you go to Hong Kong, same, very low, remarkably low fertility rate. In Singapore, the government has been bribing couples to up the birth rate for a couple of decades now. But the Chinese majority there are taking no notice at all. They're having typically not much more than one child on average. And here's a little known fact. When Britain handed Hong Kong back to China in 1997, Hong Kong had the lowest fertility rate in the world, below one child per woman, below half the replacement level. It was their choice. You know, Chris Patten wasn't running a one-child policy on the planet. This was their choice. Something real is going on around the world, which doesn't have to do with government repression or population policies or anything. It's what women are deciding to do. And it's remarkably democratic as well. Family planning experts used to say that women only started having fewer children, as we have in Europe, when they got educated or when they escaped from poverty, and preferably both. And the pessimists, I still hear them from time to time, fear that if rising population stopped people getting richer, then they'd get caught in a vicious cycle. Poverty and large families, and more poverty and more large families, and so on. Poverty trap, if you like, would become a demographic trap. But tell that to these women in Bangladesh. I met them on researching another book, actually, called, which is a book searching out where the stuff that I buy and wear came from. I went to Bangladesh to ask women in the garment factories about their lives, and these are 3 women in one such factory, or rather in their home outside it, called Aisha, Miriam, and Aki are their names. They share one room, this room in the capital of Dhaka. And while we were discussing sweatshops, I asked them about their lives, just out of interest really, not for any other purpose. They told me that together, the 3 of these women had 22 brothers and sisters from their 3 families. So I asked them how many children they planned to have themselves. And they told me that they planned between them 6 children. One was going to have 1, one was going to have 2, and one was going to have 3. And they were, you know, they were using contraception, they knew how they were going to do it, and that was their plan. And that, for me, was the global reproductive revolution summed up in one room. One generation, from 22 children to 6. And out in the Bangladeshi countryside, I met similar kinds of things. This is, I mean, they're working in the city, but in the countryside, not so similar. I met a guy called Amal, running a prawn farm. I wanted to find out where the prawns in my Saturday night curry came from, so we were talking about prawn farm bit again. Here's the picture that I took of his family. Actually, we didn't talk about family sizes then. It was only later that I looked at this picture and saw, yes, it's a big family. This is everybody who was there. What were the uncles and aunts and grandparents and so on. But if you look closely, not many children. It wasn't because they were all at school that day. There were just not many children. Bangladesh. So if you know, this is the large generation before and the small generation, much smaller generation today. Now, Bangladesh is one of the world's poorest nations. Its girls are among the least educated in the world. They mostly marry in their mid-teens, and yet they have, on average, throughout Bangladesh, just 3 children now. Now, they didn't wait for wealth or education. They made choices about their own lives. Those are their choices.